I'll just take the $20,000 gift money, and that's it. You are a stranger, so can leave. Don't ever show your face again." His face, as he said this so nonchalantly, looked downright devilish. It's astonishing how someone could string together such awful words. I got married 20 years ago. My husband, Benjamin, had his son from his ex-wife. I treated him like my true family, but it seems he felt differently. As the children grew, they became increasingly hostile. And then, at his wedding, there was no seat prepared for me. Confused, we were approached by him, brazenly demanding his gift money. "Hey, where's my $20,000? Hand it over quick." After seeing his outstretched hand, Benjamin and I exchanged looks. "All right, let's go." "Yes, let's." We turned our backs and went home. "Hey! What's this about?" Ignoring his calls to stop, we just kept walking until his voice could no longer be heard. Once we were far enough away that his voice couldn't reach us anymore, Benjamin and I exchanged glances. He still doesn't know that what was supposed to be a joyful occasion, his wedding, was about to turn into a complete disaster. My name is Scarlett Johnson, 55 years old. I live with my husband Benjamin, who is 3 years my senior. We got married 20 years ago when I was 35. Our meeting was like something out of a story, fated. It all began when Benjamin happened to visit the cafe I frequented. At the time, I often had weekdays off and would visit that cafe every Wednesday morning. That day, as usual, I was sitting by the window, drinking a latte and reading a book. The cafe owner, remembering me as a regular, would always guide me to the same spot. "Sorry, Scarlett, do you mind if someone shares the table?" Despite it being a weekday, the cafe was a bit busier than usual, and the limited seating was all taken. Hence, he asked me, sitting alone with an empty seat opposite me, if I could share. The man who sat across was Benjamin, who would later become my husband. I continued my reading, barely noticing him, until I looked up to go to the restroom and was startled. Dark circles were prominent under his eyes. He looked utterly exhausted. Nearly lifeless. "Are you okay?" Even I, not the most outgoing person, felt compelled to ask. He must not have expected to be spoken to, because he startled and his body jerked. His hand hit the coffee cup, making a small clinking sound. "Sorry to surprise you. You just seemed really tired." "Oh, no, it's okay." With that, he looked away from me. Maybe he thought I was weird or got scared. I wondered if my presence made him uncomfortable, so I decided to leave early and quickly finished my drink. Sorry, but could you possibly spare a moment to talk?" he asked, just as my latte was down to about 2 sips left, so I pulled away from the cup. He then told me his name, Benjamin, and about the situation he was in. Benjamin had lost his wife to illness a little while ago. Since then, he's been raising his son, Jack, on his own, struggling to balance work and apparently facing sleepless nights. "Take good care of Jack, please," he promised with his wife, but today, he felt like zoning out, so he went to the cafe while his son was at school. "I don't quite know how to say this, but I think you're a great dad, Benjamin." At this time, I was single. Naturally, I had no children of my own, so I couldn't say anything particularly insightful, but perhaps just talking it out seemed to brighten his face a bit. From then on, we often saw each other at the cafe. The same day of the week, around the same time. Benjamin would sit across from me, at my usual window seat. We talked about a lot of things. About his son Jack, who was 8 at the time, our jobs, and as we grew attracted to each other, we exchanged contact information and started seeing each other outside the cafe. Eventually, Benjamin confessed his feelings for me, and we started dating. After a few months of dating, we became a family. I had met Jack, his son from another marriage, a few times before we got married, but he never seemed to warm up to me. The first time we met, he hid completely behind Benjamin. After that, he didn't hide anymore, but he still wouldn't look me in the eyes. Whenever I tried to start a conversation, he would only nod or shake his head. "He'll open up in time," Jack's always been shy around new people. Trusting his words, we decided to patiently wait for a chance to get closer. However, we would later realize how naive that hope was. Jack never got closer to me. He lost his real mom when he was just a kid, so maybe he hasn't sorted out his feelings yet. To him, I might just be some stranger who suddenly showed up. I didn't expect him to call me mom, but I was hoping we could gradually become closer. However, as he grew up, he started to become more and more aggressive towards me. When he was young, he barely reacted when I spoke to him, but as he got into middle and high school, he even started to hurl insults. "Hey, lady! Didn't I tell you not to clean my room without asking? Why do you always have to meddle?" Of course, I wasn't doing chores to be thanked, but instead of any gratitude, I was met with yelling, which left me feeling utterly frustrated. "It's just his teenage years, he'll calm down in a few years." I kept telling myself that, trying to just get through it. "Hey, Jack! Why are you acting like this?" Benjamin did try to scold Jack for his behavior, but it didn't improve. Maybe because Benjamin is his biological parent, I've never seen Jack lash out at him. I hoped that once Jack got to college, he'd mature a bit and settle down, but that was far from what happened. "Ugh, I get so annoyed when that old lady talks to me," he would often mutter, smirking deliberately. It wasn't as bad as being yelled at, so maybe this was an improvement. I convinced myself to ignore it, pretending not to hear. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was better this way, feeling my heart were down, but somehow managed to raise Jack until he graduated from college, and he became a working adult. Then, he started living on his own. He seems to contact Benjamin from time to time, but I haven't received anything. There's a slight sadness in not being acknowledged as family, but I was relieved not to have to hear his snide remarks anymore. Then, one day, while Benjamin and I were at home, Jack brought a woman home without any prior notice to either of us. There was no prior notice to either Benjamin or me. Suddenly, we heard the lock turn and froze, wondering if a burglar had entered. But then Jack popped his head in, and we let out the breath we didn't realize we were holding. He had left with a key to the house but hardly ever came back, so his sudden visit was unexpected. "I'm getting married." "What?" When Jack stepped into the living room, a charming woman followed him in. "You really surprised us. Why didn't you give us a heads up?" My bad, my bad." While they were having this conversation, I went ahead and prepared tea for 4, setting it on the dining table. Then I took a seat next to Benjamin, facing Jack and the woman. The woman, Mila, is 28 years old, the same age as Jack. I don't really like coffee. Don't you have any black tea?" "Oh, I'm sorry." She peered into her mug and stretched out her voice in disappointment. Surprised by such a remark from someone I was meeting for the first time, my eyes widened. Well, it was also my fault for not asking about their preferences. Convincing myself of this, I took Mila's cup away. "Hey, I prefer black tea too." Hearing this from Jack, I decided to brew some for him as well. As I turned my back to them to make the tea, I caught a snicker that sounded rather spiteful. "I thought you were some live-in old lady Jack mentioned, like a housekeeper or something. But you're slow and don't seem like you can do chores at all." A live-in old lady? I couldn't believe that was how I was perceived. Even if not as a mother, I thought I was recognized as Benjamin's spouse. The realization was deeply saddening, and all I could do was bite my lip to endure it. I nearly teared up but focused on making the tea to keep myself composed. "Here you go, sorry for the wait." As if I hadn't heard their earlier comment, I placed the cups in front of them and sat down at the dining table. Afterwards, there were no more insults thrown in my face, and the conversation shifted to Jack and Mila. They met at work, joining the company in the same year and spending a lot of time together in the same department, which eventually led to mutual attraction. Occasionally, they would glance at me mid-conversation, then look at each other and snicker. Wondering if they were plotting something unpleasant, I stared into my cup, avoiding their gaze. In the end, they left after only informing us of their marriage plans without discussing any details. Later, Benjamin received a follow-up call, and it seems they've set a date for the wedding. And then, a little while later, the day of their wedding arrived. Dressed in formal attire I seldom wear, I felt my posture straighten. The venue was very grand. Pure white walls, a large wooden door adorned with decorations, stained glass embedded. The landscaping within the premises was meticulously pruned. We headed straight for the reception. Upon giving our names, the receptionist gave us a puzzled look. Seeing this, Benjamin and I wondered if there was something amiss. I had expected us to be smoothly guided to our seats, but that was far from the case. In fact, the receptionist began calling over another staff member nearby. As Benjamin and I exchanged glances, wondering what was going on, the receptionist awkwardly avoided eye contact and said, there is a seat for Mr. Benjamin Johnson, but there isn't one for Mrs. Scarlett Johnson.
What? What do you mean?
Despite nothing being wrong on our end, the receptionist bowed apologetically. Your name wasn't on the guest list to begin with.
That can't be.
Could it be that the two main characters of today had orchestrated this? Other guests waiting in line at the reception were watching us, wondering what was going on. We decided to step aside for a moment to let others check in.
What's going on? Why isn't Scarlett's name on the list?
As Benjamin murmured this, a figure approached us. It was Jack, looking utterly pleased with himself.
Hey Jack, what's this all about? My name was the only one missing. Was it some kind of mistake?
Huh? No way. Of course, I did it. I had asked, hoping against hope, but was bluntly denied.
Why would you do such a thing?
Why? Because there's no point in inviting someone who's not related by blood, right? I don't consider you my mom, after all.
That's...
So, all this time since the remarriage, he had thought of me that way. Although I had vaguely known, hearing it from him directly made my heart ache.
Mila also said we shouldn't bother inviting that old lady.
But of course, Dad, you're welcome to attend. Benjamin's brow furrowed deeply. Unaware of the impact of his words, Jack continued to chatter away. Right, did you bring the wedding gift? He said, extending his hand towards me. Put it here, he must be implying. I'll just take the $20,000 gift money. You old lady, like a stranger, can leave that and get out. Never show your face again. His face, as he said this so nonchalantly, seemed downright demonic. It's astonishing how he could string together such awful things. Being called a stranger, my heart went completely cold. Memories started to flow through my mind unbidden. Trying to talk to a young Jack, getting glared at when I attended a school event, him turning away and not making eye contact at all. All my efforts to get along felt utterly in vain.
Hey, where's the $20,000? Hand it over quick.
After seeing his outstretched hand, Benjamin and I exchanged looks. All right, let's go. Yes, let's. We turned our backs on Jack and walked towards the exit.
What? Hey, the gift money. And why is Dad leaving too?
We turned our backs on Jack and walked towards the exit. Jack came rushing from behind, caught up with us and circled around in our direction.
Hey! What's this about? What do you mean what? We don't have $20,000 to give you, so we're leaving.
As I said this calmly, he glanced at Benjamin as if looking for help.
Why are you leaving too? You said that someone not related by blood should leave, that's why.
After saying just that, we started walking again. We could hear him calling out from behind, but we never looked back and went straight home. It turns out the wedding was a disaster. There was nobody from the groom's side at the venue, no relatives or colleagues. In fact, Benjamin had asked the family to attend conditionally. Jack had always had a poor relationship with relatives, always taking a bad attitude even on the rare occasions they met. He'd snatch games from younger cousins to play with. He'd call older relatives disrespectful names like old lady and old man. And yet, he would greedily beg for holiday money. Not just Benjamin, but the entire family had warned him, but to no avail. They, like me, had hoped he would settle down as he grew up. However, that hope was thoroughly dashed. Jack, even as a high school or college student, lost the trust of his relatives completely. They hadn't wanted to attend the wedding but had agreed to do so for me and Benjamin's sake. We were aware that Jack and his circle might be plotting something. They could speak ill of me right in front of me. It was unlikely they'd let me attend the ceremony normally. Mila, likely sharing a similar mindset with Jack, must have conspired with him. Anticipating this, we had already spoken to everyone beforehand. If anything happens, you don't have to stay at the ceremony. We'll leave, so feel free to go as well. The relatives all nodded firmly. And it wasn't just the relatives who had agreed to attend conditionally. The company colleagues were the same. In fact, Benjamin is the CEO of his own company. Jack had struggled with job hunting in college, failing to receive any job offers. Seeing this, Benjamin had pulled some strings to get him a position in a subsidiary of his company.
Dad, thank you so much. I'll work hard not to disgrace you,
he had said, completely forgetting those words as his work attitude was poor. He frequently arrived late, left early under the pretense of illness, and fell asleep during work, among other issues. His performance was the worst in the department. Initially, Benjamin had covered Jack's rent for the apartment he lived in after graduating from college.
Cancel the apartment lease and come back home. That should reduce your tardiness,
he often said, but each time, Jack would show a semblance of remorse. Yet, a week later, the cycle of tardiness would repeat. Once Jack started paying his own rent as work stabilized, the pleas to return home were ignored. Benjamin often made phone calls at home to the subsidiary company about Jack. The topic, of course, was about Jack. I'm really sorry for the trouble. I keep hoping he'll improve as he gets used to the job, he'd say before ending the call, often followed by a deep sigh that I frequently witnessed. He'd change as he grew up. He'd change as he got accustomed. Those hopes were consistently crushed. Indeed, Jack's work attitude never improved. He also lost trust among company colleagues. When Benjamin set conditions, the relatives and colleagues nodded in agreement. Thus, the wedding venue, with empty seats for family and company associates, had an almost hellish atmosphere. Mila's acquaintances were supposed to attend, but given her personality, she didn't have many friends. The attempt to liven up the ceremony with the few attendees tired out towards the end, resulting in sparse applause. Without close friends to rely on, the self-made wedding video played to a silent room. The sparse attendance was all the more noticeable in the large venue. Mila's parents were disappointed, saying, "To think he's so unpopular that guests would leave. It's shameful." Returning home, Benjamin, out of his suit, sat wearily on the sofa. Whether he was contemplating about Jack, he closed his eyes and pressed a hand to his forehead. I decided to change out of my formal attire into something more comfortable.
If strangers should leave, then what about company people or Mila's acquaintances? They'd all be unable to attend.
I whisper this jokingly, but no matter what I say now, I can't undo that wedding. The formal wear we had carefully prepared ended up being taken off shortly after. I wondered when there would be another occasion to wear it as I hung it up on the hanger. Following that, Jack's calls didn't cease for a while. Initially, they were only directed at Benjamin, but soon after realizing he wouldn't answer, Jack started calling me too. It was the first time Jack had ever called me. Reluctantly answering due to his persistence, I could hear his voice trembling with tears over the phone.
"Dad, please don't abandon me. I'll apologize for that day." You should be apologizing to Scarlett, not just for now but for everything you've done to her over the years,
Benjamin responded before hanging up, only for the calls to resume shortly after. With a resigned tone, Benjamin revealed a truth to Jack.
"Actually, I've never said this, but you and I are also strangers, not related by blood." "What? What do you mean?"
Yes, Jack was actually the child of Benjamin's ex-wife. Because Benjamin had married his ex-wife when Jack was too young to understand, Jack had thought they were biologically related. However, they were legally strangers. The word stranger Jack had used at the wedding, intended only for me, ironically applied to Benjamin as well.
If you look down on strangers that much, then I guess I'm included in that too. No, I mean, I didn't know about Dad.
Despite his excuses, no apologies came forth.
I'm sorry, but I have to cut ties. We're strangers, after all.
Perhaps stunned by the formally distant you, Jack said nothing. While he remained silent, Benjamin ended the call and then reached out to someone at the subsidiary.
Hello? Yes, about Jack. I think it's time to let him go.
The person at the subsidiary, who had long been exasperated by Jack's work attitude, readily agreed to this. Thus, having lost both his family and his job, Jack seems to be spending his days in deep regret and reflection. By the way, he hasn't divorced Mila, but they often argue, especially when reminiscing about the wedding. I am living a peaceful life with Benjamin. For our next day off, we've promised to visit the cafe where we first met, sharing smiles at the thought.